Very happy to have you here at this opening session of the 2024 season of Minamata Online. I'll start with some housekeeping notes while we're waiting for others to join us. So if the moderator opens the floor, and if you wish to take the floor, please click the raise hand icon that appears next to your name on the participants panel. The moderator will call names based on the order of raised hands and allow you to unmute. So at that point, when you're named, please unmute yourself. And when your speaking time is over, please do mute yourself again and click the lower hand icon. You can put questions also in the chat box and send those to everyone. We will have a Q&A segment of this session at the end in our last 10 to 15 minutes. But you're encouraged to put any questions in the chat box at any point during the session. And if you need technical assistance, please put your message also in the chat box and send it to the host or co-host. And kindly note that this session is being recorded. And please help us to keep improving the experience by filling out the survey at the end of this webinar. So once again, my name is Mary Ann Bailey. I'm the Senior Coordination Officer here at the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. And this is the opening session of our 2024 season of Minamata Online. It's our fourth season. This is a series of webinars that we do to keep our stakeholders informed about the important things going on within the convention, within the science community, within our stakeholder community, to move the world towards fully implementing the Minamata Convention on Mercury and protecting the world from Mercury's health effects and environmental effects. So today's session is on mainstreaming gender in capacity building projects and its practical approaches. So I'm very pleased to have a great set of experts here in the field of project management and funds management towards the implementation of multilateral approaches to chemicals and waste management worldwide. And to start us off, I'm very pleased to turn this over to Monica Stankiewicz, the Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, for her opening remarks. Monica.
Thank you so much, Marianne, and good day, everyone. Warmly welcome to all participants, and thank you for joining us for this first session of the Minamata Online Season 4 on mainstreaming gender in capacity building projects with focus on practical approaches. We are very happy to launch this season on the eve of International Women's Day and to kick off with a session on gender. Today's session will replicate the Knowledge Lab event that was held during our recent meeting of the Minamata Convention Conference of the Parties last November. And we are very happy to join forces again with our colleagues from the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, and the special program on institutional strengthening for the chemicals cluster, to discuss with you how gender considerations have, to date, been integrated into the projects of the specific international program SIP and the GEF. These are two components of the Minamata Convention financial mechanism and into the project of the special program. Today's presentation will show you how this integration has been realized so far into application criteria for funding, application guidelines, project applications, reporting forms, and project evaluation processes. And let me also highlight that this event is part of our larger and continued efforts to coordinate between the different mechanisms providing funding to the global commitment of countries related to chemicals and waste. And this is something that is also included in one of the resolution of the recently concluded sixth session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, UNA 6. And specifically, it is included in the resolution on the sound management of chemicals and waste, and based on which the coordination will now also include the Global Framework on Chemicals Fund. We have envisaged this event as a forum for dissemination of very practical information and suggestions for current project managers and prospective applicants for projects funded by these funding sources I've mentioned. You may be by now fully aware that the Minamata Convention pays specific attention to the needs of populations in vulnerable situations, and especially women and children. And this vulnerable situation is exposure to chemicals and mercury pollution. And therefore, I'm very pleased to inform you that the Minamata Convention has now a comprehensive gender action plan in place. And our recent COP last year requested the Secretariat and invited parties to carry out certain activities included in this gender action plan in the current biennium and to report on the progress made in the next COP of Minamata Convention 2025. So I'm delighted that today's sessions present a step forward in the implementation of these activities. And I would like to take this opportunity to invite all parties and stakeholders engaged in our work or engaged in the projects of the SIP, JEF, and special program to actively engage in mainstreaming gender into the activities and implementation of the Minamata Convention. And with this last call, or the last sentences, let me conclude my opening remarks and hand over to you, Marianne. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for opening up this session, which we have really looked forward to for many weeks. I'd like to turn now to Lara Onyebene. Lara is the legal and program officer at the Secretariat, and she's also our gender focal point. So she was instrumental in getting this gender action plan in place, and she'll explain it to you now. Over to you, Lara.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you, Monica. I will be very brief because Monica has already touched upon some of the points that are in my few slides. But just to confirm and point out again that gender is features in many articles in the text of our convention. The convention text pays specific attention to the needs of vulnerable population, especially women and children. There is mentioning of this group in the preamble of the convention, but also in a number of articles, like Article 16 on health aspects, Article 18 on public information, awareness and education, in Article 19 on research development and monitoring, and also in Article 22 on effectiveness evaluation. So it is really the needs of vulnerable populations are reminded or referred to in many instances in the text of our convention, including with respect to artisanal and small-scale gold mining in Annex C to the convention on ASGM. There is a mentioning of the needs of vulnerable population and the need to include in national action plans on SGM strategies to prevent the exposure of vulnerable population, in particular children and women. So moving on to the next slide, I have one slide on ASGM just to specifically refer to this informal sector, which is regulated under our convention, under Article 7, but in a very flexible manner that should allow integration of social and gender-related consideration in the development of such national action plans. UNEP developed in cooperation with the Secretariat a guide on how to integrate gender into the development of national action plans under the convention. And so you also have a specific publication here. I have a picture of it in our slide as part of our continuous commitment into integrating gender in the work of the that is being undertaken under the convention. My next slide is about the process of adopting this the gender action plan that was mentioned earlier by Monica, and that our COP also consistently strengthened the integration of gender into the program of work of the Minamata Convention, starting from COP3, where gender was identified as a focus area of our program of work and budget, and then at COP4, where the COP considered a gender action plan and further requested the Secretariat to develop a gender action plan. And then at our last COP5, where this gender action plan was adopted or welcomed, and also along with a list of priority activities to be undertaken by the Secretariat, by parties and other stakeholders during the intersessional period until COP6. If we move on to the next slide, please. This is my last slide. So why a gender action plan? The purpose of the plan is to provide a blueprint for actions for different actors that are implementing the convention. So as mentioned, the Secretariat, but also parties and other stakeholders, with the objective of mainstreaming gender in all activities that are being undertaken under the convention and to implement the convention. COP5 identified a list of priority activities, and this one that we are conducting today, this specific workshop or webinar, is one of the priority activities for the biennium, which is to deliver gender sensitive training in the development of project proposals in order to access funding under our financial mechanism. So I'll stop here in case you need or want to have more information on our gender activities and gender action plan. I invite you to visit our website where you can find more information. So thank you very much, and back to you, Marianne.
Thank you, Lara. And I want to let all our participants know that as with all our Minamata Online sessions, all the presentation materials, as well as the recording of the session, will be available on our website in about a day from now. So you can always refer back to the slides and you can always use them for your own purposes in your national project management and moving forward on putting these practices into use in your own contexts. So now I would like to move on to the specific international program, and I will turn it over to Maria Irene Rizzo. She's our associate expert here at the Secretariat. And she has been the driving force and energy in managing all the 24 projects to date under the specific international program, which is one part of our the Minamata Convention financial mechanism, the other part being the Global Environment Facility, who you'll hear from later in this session. But for now, I'd love to turn it over to Irene to talk about mainstreaming gender in SIP projects.
Thank you very much, Marian, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants. As Marian said, I will present on mainstreaming gender in projects of the specific international program that we call the SIP. And as you've heard from my colleague Lara, gender mainstreaming is, of course, very important, an important part of the convention, but also of the work of the Secretariat to support parties in the implementation of the convention. And Article 13 of the convention, as Marian just mentioned, defines the financial mechanism, which is composed by the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, the SIP, and there is also a related fund that supports the implementation of the Minamata Convention, and it is the special program. All of these support mechanisms require focus on gender considerations in the project development, but also review, reporting, and evaluation. And this with the aim of ensuring that implementation takes full account of the gender aspects and considerations. And in the field of chemicals and waste management, of course, the gender-specific exposures and impacts are of particular importance. And also other aspects are very important, like the inclusive stakeholder engagement and awareness raising, but also the recognition of differentiated impacts of mercury management decisions, the involvement in policy development and decision making, and the engagement in project management. In the next slide, I will provide a few elements about the SIP and briefly some background on the specific international program. So we have had 3 rounds of applications to date with 24 projects approved in 22 parties, which are developing country parties or parties with economies in transition. And the SIP is supporting these parties in all regions, and it is supporting them in implementing specific obligations under the convention. Across the 3 rounds, we have also had a number of projects in least developed countries and in small island developing states. And the 24 projects of the SIP are now in different stages of implementation, with some projects already closed. In the next slide, I would just like to inform you that we have recently launched the dashboard on the SIP, and this dashboard provides a lot of information about the SIP projects approved to date and is available on our website. And in the next slide, I will now come to the subject of this presentation, which is mainstreaming gender in SIP applications. And I would like to start by saying that gender is one of the appraisal criteria and is a required application element. And in fact, there is a specific section on gender in the project application form. And also we have the SIP application guidelines that you can find linked on this slide, which provide information on how to ensure gender mainstreaming in the project application. And the applications submitted for SIP funding need to explain how the design, but also the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the project addresses gender consideration. And we normally recommend also to include gender indicators and targets in the project logical framework when designing all the outputs and activities of the project. And these indicators and targets could reflect activities that you see listed in this slide. For example, they could reflect activities related to generated sex disaggregated data, also planning and organizing awareness raising activities on the different impacts of mercury management. It could be on promoting multi-stakeholder approaches to ensure effective participation of different groups, including women. And it could be also on creating terms of reference for project staff that ensure equal opportunity for men and women, and where applicable also require skills and expertise in gender. And it could also be on monitoring and evaluating the benefits, the participation, and the feedback among women and men during the project activities. In the next slide, I would just give you some information about the SIP projects. So the SIP can provide support to projects from $50,000 to $250,000 per project. And for projects funded by the SIP that have a budget of $150,000 or less, the recipient government is required to arrange for the terminal review. While for the projects with a SIP funding of over 150,000, the terminal evaluation is mandatory and it's carried out by the Secretariat, in fact, by an independent evaluator hired by the Secretariat. So in both the guidelines for conducting the terminal review and the terminal evaluation, which are linked on this slide, there is a section 5.6 on gender strategies that requires to describe how the project implemented its gender strategies. And you can find, of course, the link to this terminal review and terminal evaluation guidance on the website. Moving on to the next slide. So I've spoken about how to include gender considerations in the application and also how the terminal review or evaluation of completed projects will consider gender elements. And now I would like to give you some examples of some SIP projects that have mainstream gender to date. The first project I would like to show you is the Argentina project. This was a project in the first round that was completed in December 2021. And he produced a report on mercury and gender issues that highlighted how biological differences and social factors, including the discrepancies in occupation and household responsibilities, influence the way men and women are exposed to mercury. And the findings showed that the coordination with key actors is essential to identify how the population that are potentially at risk including in designing new policies, especially in the health sector, to raise awareness on the health and environmental aspects of mercury. And the report also suggested some further actions to advance public policies that provide women and pregnant women with the necessary care and support to avoid dental restorations with dental amalgam. In the next slide, I will give you another example, and this is the project in Armenia. Again, a first round project completed in November 2021. And in this case, the project partner worked in close cooperation with a non-governmental organization, an NGO called Armenian Women for Health and Healthy Environment, which was a key partner in the implementation of several activities to support the implementation of Article 4, which is on mercury added products. And in particular, this NGO helped the project partner in gathering data to study the distribution of lamps in different regions of Armenia, also developed some awareness raising campaigns in different regions of Armenia, and involved many vulnerable populations, discussing the health risks related to the use of mercury and the alternatives to mercury. In the next slide, this is another example. It's a project in Iran from the first round of the SIP. It was completed in 2021. And it's a project on the commissioning of chloralkali plants in the petrochemical industry. In fact, SIP projects can also support implementation of Article 5 of the Minamata Convention on Manufacturing Processes in which mercury and mercury compounds are used. And this specific project developed a job hazard analysis tool for health and safety risk assessment, which would identify the population groups most at risk. And also in this project, women were part of the implementing team. And the project also developed some guidelines on the decommissioning of the plan, including environmental sound management of mercury wastes. And these guidelines sets out measures that could be applied in mitigating the effects of mercury emissions and releases on breastfeeding and pregnant women. In the next slide, I will present another project in Antigua and Barbuda, and this is a regional project. In fact, also the SIP supports projects that can be carried out at the regional level, but also sub-regional, inter-regional, and national, of course. This project was completed last year in October, and we had 10 countries collaborating through the establishment of a Caribbean region mercury monitoring network, which would monitor mercury risks in the environment and in the food chain to support the policy development at the national level. And this project conducted many case studies of mercury levels in women of childbearing age. And to better understand the human exposure to mercury or human health, the project also developed some protocols for sampling and analysis of human hair, and the identification and testing of some skin lightening products that contain mercury. The next project, I have two more projects. So the next one is in Zambia. It's part of the second round of applications to the SIP, and we closed this year in August. And this project is about implementation of Article 4 of the Minamata Convention on Mercury Added Products, and especially it focuses on skin lightening creams and soaps, and aims to raise awareness on the effects of exposure to mercury on human health and to reduce the exposure to mercury, especially for women and children. In the next slide, This is the last project I would like to present to you, and it's about a project in Rwanda. It's a third round project. It started just last year and will be concluded in September 2025. And the project logical framework includes some gender-specific activities and indicators, and this is quite important and something that we normally encourage to include the gender indicators in the logical framework. And in particular, this project will create a gender monitoring office, which is part of the National Mercury Working Group established to coordinate the implementation of the project. And we'll also produce information materials and media containing gender-specific information. And we'll organize a national multi-stakeholder forum to highlight the impacts of Mercury on gender. So with this, I have one final slide. Well, as Lara mentioned, we have a web page on our website focusing on gender on the Minamata Convention. And also I would like to remind you that last year, as part of Minamata Online Season 2 in 2022, not last year, we had a session on promoting gender equality in the implementation of the convention, and you can find the recording of the session and the slides on the website. And last year, for International Women's Day, we also had a SIP story released on our website, which shows how the SIP projects are taking full account of gender considerations. And with that, I hand over to Marian, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. And I would like to note with appreciation that we've received some generous financial support from the government of Finland to pull together case studies of gender elements in SIP projects and how this work is carried out in much more detail than you're able to see today, as well as gender elements of national action plans on artisanal and small scale gold mining. So we're really looking forward to having that real library of information available for all of you and all stakeholders to refer to and to inspire you to take this even further in your national projects. And that will be available within this year. So with that, I'd like to now move on to our partner in the other component of our convention's financial mechanism, the Global Environment Facility. And we have with us today Verona Colentes Labale. She is the Senior Gender Specialist with the Global Environment Facility, and she's joining us from Washington, D.C. So Verona, we thank you for being with us in your morning and for all the partnership we've had to date with you along the way. Over to you.
Thank you, Marian and colleagues at the Minamata Convention Secretariat. It's a pleasure for me to join your panel, and really, I was very interested and keenly listening to the presentations from your secretariat. It's amazing work of integrating gender, and I'm really glad that we are really complementing each other in advancing gender equality, because we can only do so much, but your role is very, very important as the Secretariat. So as many of you may know, just a brief background on the Global Environment Facility. It's the largest environmental multi-donor trust fund. It serves as financial mechanism of 5 international environmental conventions. One of them is the Minamata Convention. And of course, we get guidance and mandates from the conventions that we serve, and therefore support the implementation of the goals and objectives of the MEAs, including what was already earlier mentioned: national plans and strategy development, reporting obligations, capacity building, and so on. So the Global Environment Facility is also governed by a set of policy frameworks, and one of them is gender equality, along with stakeholder engagement, environmental social safeguards, and our fiduciary standards. So in this slide, you can see how the GEF considers really gender as instrumental in advancing global environment benefits, and it's really very high on our agenda. In this current cycle, we are in fact further strengthening the way we want gender to be incorporated in projects submitted for funding or funded by the GEF. Because we acknowledge that gender equality and women's empowerment is not just the right thing to do, but it also catalyzes gender responsive environmental actions and the sustainability of these environmental actions. And there are evidence showing that. So as you can see in this slide, we have our gender policy, which was adopted in 2018, and there's adopted in 2017, implemented start from 2018, and there's accompanying guidance to advance gender equality in GEF projects. On to the next slide, please. So here you can see it's how gender is required in the project design. So from the project concept to the project development and project monitoring and reporting. And earlier on, as we saw in the earlier slides presented in the SIP project, for example, we also want gender integrated in the project component. So it doesn't become just a separate section talking to itself, but what we want is the gender considerations are in fact incorporated into the project components themselves. So we make sure that they are addressed in the context of the project. And I just want to highlight that. One aspect that we require for the consideration of gender is to start with a gender analysis, because this is going to be the basis of the development of the gender action plan, and then eventually how you integrate gender into the project components with gender disaggregated data or gender sensitive indicators. So that's the ideal. And also at the level of project monitoring and reporting, there is a requirement to report on gender related results, and also to share good practices, methodologies, and lessons learned. The next slide, please. Here, I just want to mention, I like this slide because it just encapsulates what we really mean when we say gender equality. Our default mode is always, oh, we consulted women. We have sex disaggregated data. We have awareness raising activities. But that's not enough. So in the earlier slide that we saw also from the SIP example, when you develop policies, develop plans, strategies, there has to be gender expertise. There has to be acknowledgement of gender differences that you have to incorporate in these policies. You put women in leadership positions, not just counting them in consultations. And more importantly, addressing or considering important gender inequalities that may impede their participation. So when do you hold consultations? Maybe these are the times when they're doing household duties. What are the norms, cultural factors? Maybe you need to speak to the village chief to engage them in consultations. Are there language barriers? The issue of gender-based violence. So all of these have to be considered for us to be able to substantively address gender inequalities in the project. And to the next slide, please. So now I'm getting into some examples in the context of the Minamata Convention. So you may know that we report, the GEF reports on reports to your COP on how gender, not just gender, but how we contribute to the implementation of the convention. And there is a gender aspect or section to that. And in the last reports, we have reviewed 12 projects, and all of these projects obviously incorporate gender because it's a requirement. And of the 12 projects approved, 8 were enabling activities. And you can see in this slide how gender has been reflected in these enabling activities. and the lower part of it, how gender have been reflected in projects. And you can see that there are aspects of engaging women in decision-making and governance processes, to development of toolkits, conducting gender-specific training, having gender-sensitive indicators, development of communication and knowledge products, and tracking and reporting on gender-specific results. So we can see that the requirements of the GEF is actually reflected in the projects that are submitted to the GEF. Next slide, please. So this one is just I have a few examples, and this is one example of a project accelerating Minamata Convention compliance through improved understanding and control of mercury trade in Latin America. So here you can see what the project components are. So there are the three project components, and in the next slide, I want to show how gender were integrated. Yeah, so incorporation of gender responsive measures in mercury trade assessments, gender responsive national laws for monitoring and control of legal mercury trade, and gender sensitive communication strategy. And then most importantly, in the monitoring and evaluation, there's also an aspect there that considers gender, and it's budgeted. So this is really an important point that I want to mention. In the next slide, I have another example. This is on eliminating mercury in skin lightening products. And I'm not going to read all of this. You will have the presentation available, but just to show how gender, again, has been implemented, captured in the project design. And eventually, our hope is that this is going to translate into the implementation and monitoring and reporting. So it's from information to institutionalization. There's education aspect, economic, cultural, and behavioral. So it's the whole. It's very broad and very comprehensive. The next slide, please. This is Planet Gold, and I think it has been mentioned also earlier. This is one of the projects that we are very proud of, because gender is really part and embedded into the project itself. And we can see the different aspects of how this projects, including in the child projects, of course, integrate genders. So from promoting aspects of program, what I like is the access to finance, because this is really, really important in this project, because what we've learned is women cannot acquire safe equipment because they don't have access to finance and also technology. So this one aspect, supported by capacity building, trainings, workshop, and supporting alternative to mining activities, improving gender sensitive regulations. And there's the most important aspects, awareness raising and information to governments, so they can address this factor and integrate it in their actions. And also the aspect of preventing gender-based violence. The last slide, I think, or closer to, yeah. So this is another project, the Jeff Islands. It has a very strong component of gender. In fact, there is a coordination, communication, and knowledge management platform that is guided by a global gender action plan, and they ensure that the gender equality principles, best practices, and safeguard mechanisms are rooted and again embedded into the project itself and in the implementation. And there is a publicly available online course on gender mainstreaming. I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so this again, I'm not gonna read all this, but this is just showing you, this is the what are the things that the Islands Project have incorporated in their gender action plan. and more importantly, that these are budgeted. So for my last slide, I just want to show that we have a Jeff Gender Partnership, and I'm really happy that the Minamata Convention Secretariat is a very active member of the Jeff Gender Partnership. And moving forward, just to mention that I will be very happy together with the other members of the Jeff Gender Partnership to support any capacity building or training activities, webinars that you will be having, and also in the implementation of your gender action plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Verona. I think we can all see that these Jeff projects and the way the gender elements are incorporated will really have a impact far, far into the future. And it's really kind of groundbreaking and really influential. So thank you for that. Before we move on to our next speakers, I just want to remind participants that you're free to put any questions you might have or observations into the chat, and we will go to a Q&A segment at the end. But first, I'm really happy that we have our colleagues from the special program, the UNEP special program for institutional strengthening in the chemicals and waste arena. And we have with us today Nicole Cesar. She's an associate program officer at the Special Program Secretariat, and Felix Herzog, who's a program officer at the Special Program Secretariat, and he's also their monitoring and evaluation specialist. And we at the Minamata Convention Secretariat always rely on our colleagues at the special program, and because they're doing such a fantastic job of managing the many, many projects they have going to really support countries as they seek to strengthen their ability to manage the risks of chemicals and waste. So I turn it over, I guess, to you, Nicole, first, or you and Felix together. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Marianne. And again, a big thank you for the opportunity for us to participate and contribute in this really important webinar. So to get started with the first slide. So this quote from UNEP's Executive Director, Inger Angerson, it speaks to the importance of including women in the conversations and to transform the balance of power, right, to attain the SDGs. We know that gender mainstreaming is crucial in the 2030 agenda to target inequalities amongst various groups, especially women, children, and the impoverished through the 17 SDGs. So UNEP has identified gender inequality as one of the main challenges to advancing the environmental dimensions of sustainable development. So, I mean, as mentioned by the previous presenters, in many developing countries, women and girls' traditional responsibilities in society as food growers, as water and fuel gatherers and caregivers, connect them closely to available natural resources, but also the environmental conditions have different impacts on the lives of men and women due to existing gender equalities and the traditional roles in society that the different genders tend to play. So women are more likely to store environmental pollutants in their bodies due to higher proportion of body fat compared to men. And then, of course, pregnancy, lactation, and menopause cause women to undergo physiological changes that can increase both the mothers and their fetuses' vulnerability to toxic chemicals. And then on the next slide, shifting to the special program, which is a funding mechanism within UNEP, which was established by the United Nations Environment Assembly to support institutional strengthening at the national level for the sound management of chemicals and waste by providing funding to developing countries and to countries with economies in transition. The special program is financed entirely through voluntary contributions from donors, which to date amount to approximately $35 million US. And the special program operates through annual calls for applications for funding. The special program has completed 6 rounds of funding to date, with 75 projects approved in 65 countries in Africa, Asia Pacific, Central and Eastern Europe, and Latin America, and the Caribbean. And the 7th round applications are currently under consideration. And on the next slide, We see here the core attributes of a successful special program project, where the top one, symbolized by the globe, highlights the importance of country ownership as project proposals are developed by the countries themselves to respond to national needs and priorities. Special program projects support institutional strengthening for sound management of chemicals and waste, and should adopt a cross-cutting approach across the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm, and Minamata conventions, and also SICAM, now the new global framework on chemicals. Projects should seek to promote policies, strategies, and implementation frameworks and capacity building, also with a focus to ensure sustainability of project outcomes beyond the lifetime of the project by integrating them into the regular ongoing national operations. And gender mainstreaming is an important attribute of a successful special program project, as sound management of chemicals and waste involves assessing and planning for how the harmful impacts of pollution from chemicals and waste affect women, children, and men differently, as mentioned by Verona and Maria Irene previously. Men and women can face different levels of exposure to different chemicals and their waste, again, due to their different roles in society. And physiologically, women tend to be smaller in size and have the primary role in childbearing and a major role in child rearing. And a woman's chemical burden can be passed on to her baby during gestation through the placenta as well as via breastfeeding. So the inclusion of both men and women in policy development and in decision making brings different experiences and perspectives to the table that serve to strengthen proposed policies and proposed activities. And then on the next slide, so how does a special program work to ensure that gender mainstreaming takes place? There is a guidance on the scope of the special program document on our website, which includes some useful information and links on gender in chemicals and waste and on gender mainstreaming. So please feel free to have a look on our website. And then also, as mentioned by the previous presenters, there is a specific section in special program applications where the gender mainstreaming approach needs to be clearly outlined by the applicants. And we work with the applicants to strengthen the approach where necessary. And then on the next slide, so the special program portfolio of projects is quite diverse because they are country driven, and so they look quite different from each other. But I will now hand over to my colleague Felix, who will highlight how special program projects are and have addressed gender mainstreaming. Over to you, Felix.
Thank you, Nicole. Next slide. So basically, we have looked at all our projects from the portfolio, and we have identified actually 4 levels of gender integration, and it really nicely ties to what Irene has just presented, and as well Verona. So the first level, what we see where there is some gender mainstreaming, would be the sex disaggregated data collection, because this is the first level of intervention to know, okay, what are the risks of this specific population and how can they be addressed? How are the needs? The second level that we have identified is once we know the risks and once there are the specific needs, it's really about doing the awareness raising, preparing guidance documents and having specific trainings. But as Verona said in her presentation as well, a training sometimes is not enough. So some projects go even further and they ensure that this participation of leadership in leadership position of women as well, so they can be really integrated in management processes. And some projects even have gone even further to really embed the women aspects into the legislative reform or specific policies. Next slide. So basically, here are examples of our projects that have really integrated the sex disaggregation of data. So we have projects in Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Vanuatu, which have, for example, a national database on chemicals and waste. We specifically included sex disaggregated data. For example, in Palestine, we have a compilation of sex disaggregated data for the BRS reporting. Or for example, in Kiribati, we have a database on chemicals and contaminated sites that includes socioeconomic factors as gender. In Georgia, there was a gap analysis for the coordination of the sound management of chemicals and waste with gender consideration, and as well in Madagascar, a study on correlations between chemicals exposure and gender-specific health effects. Next slide. So basically now moving to the second level of integration of gender, we have, for example, specific awareness raising in Malawi. We have an awareness raising campaign for vulnerable groups, including pregnant women in our project in Armenia. In Cambodia, we have an awareness raising and training, including specifically gender issues. And in Peru, there was a very nice communication campaign for the sensitization and awareness on the specific needs and risk of women regarding chemicals and waste, and as well in Moldova and Iran. Next slide. So also in Belarus, we move on from the awareness raising to actually workshops. Here we have, for example, a workshop on relationship between susceptibility to chemicals exposures, health effects, and gender differences. And in Rwanda, we also had a specific training on the roles of the BRS Convention and SICAM, and also recommendations for a multi-stakeholder forum on gender mainstreaming strategy and development. And for example, in Burundi, this project went one level further in the integration of gender and the mainstream gender in the chemicals and waste management. So that means that women were actually integrated, or the participation of women was really a requirement to really be part of the decisions that were taken in the area of chemicals and wastes. And basically the fourth level is only in our Gola project, but they developed a gender action plan and integrated gender-related issues directly into the legislation on chemicals and waste. So this is the highest level basically of integration that we have identified in our projects. And now we can go to the next slides. I think it's already 51, so I will just really briefly touch upon this project. So we have a special program project in India that, for example, also did the first level, the sex disaggregation data, and as well the second level, the gender mainstreaming through awareness raising and also specific guidance documents. To the next slide. And basically, just to sum up, if for some of you would like to delve a bit deeper into the work of related to gender of the special program projects, we have specific gender fact sheets with specific information and guidance on how to best integrate gender in projects related to chemicals and waste, and for example, in this case, mercury. So I think I will leave it there because I know it's already 52, and back to you, Marian.
Thank you very much, Felix and Nicole. This was really enlightening. A lot of good information that people can refer back to. So we really, really appreciate that. I don't see, let's see, I'm looking in the chat and I don't see any specific questions to our presenters yet, but my colleagues will let me know if I'm wrong about that. And so while we're waiting a few minutes to see if we have questions from the floor, let me ask our presenters if there's any additional thoughts that you didn't have time to add. If you would like to add anything now, please go ahead.
Mariana, I just wanted, I put it in the chat. I just wanted to appreciate the areas of focus slide presented by our colleagues from UNEP. And then I think it's good to really build on that because you have the legislation. And then I just thought maybe another, like further to the right, you can have gender budgets. And then maybe we can add, I like it. I think we can use that as a format, and then among ourselves, we can develop some projects, examples along those continuum. Thank you for starting with that. Yeah.
I agree, Verona, and I'm really happy that you said that you and your team may be able to assist moving forward. I think we'll definitely be reaching out to you to do some workshops and some training.
Felix, we can't hear you.
I think also building up on what Verona and said, it's really important to be aware that gender is not only about integrating them into the work plan and the indicators. It means is like a mindset that has to accompany the entire project. And this also implies specific budgets, but a specific person that will be really there to understand and to really make sure that all the activities embed these priorities. Because I think, as Verona said very rightly, so it's not about integrating here or there some paragraph, some gender, but it's really to actually think of each of the activities a project could have. How are the implications for gender and vulnerable people? Because it could be also indigenous people, children. So I think this is really the way to go, because environment is really affecting people differently, and the more data we have and the more interest and thought we put into the projects, and then afterwards time, and that means also budget, the more we can have impact in our projects.
And I fully agree with Felix, and if I may just add something related to the SIP, on top of, as I said during my presentation, indicating gender aspects and elements in the logical framework, which is extremely important, it is also useful if the project partners involved in SIP projects report on progress with aspects related to gender also in the reports that are submitted twice a year, in June and in December. So it really allows us to see how the project is making progress vis-a-vis gender mainstreaming. And it is also useful for the project manager to see how the project is making progress in that sense.
And I think all these remarks point us towards the basic key point, which is that gender is not an add-on. It's an essential part of a project, and it's essential to a project's success. It really you can't get the full benefits, and you might not even get the partial benefits of your project if these considerations aren't built in from the beginning and implemented throughout and monitored and evaluated. So really all these strategies, there's ways to do this. The procedures are there and can always be innovated on and improved, but this is not just an add-on to a project. It's really got to be done for the success of the project, the program, and the environmental objectives and health objectives that we're trying to achieve. Any last comments or questions from anyone? Lara?
If there are no questions, I wanted also to, confirm what my colleague said, the importance of integrating and reporting on the gender aspects of the projects as part of the implementation of our gender action plan is also to identify some SIP stories to showcase how projects have integrated successfully gender elements, and this will be part also of the information that we will report back to our COP and to our parties of how we have implemented the gender action plan and how in practice also these elements of gender elements are reflected in the way we make the SIP work. So it's very good for us to also have a full range of data information on gender and how it's integrated in projects, so that also we can show how this can work and be an example for others as we report to our COP and our parties.
Thank you, Lara. And in our last couple of minutes, Felix, I think I'm going to put you on the spot because we do have a question about, can we explain more about calculating, monitoring, and evaluating? So can you talk about how you've been able to advance the monitoring and evaluation of the gender elements in your projects?
Yes, so basically to capture the integration of gender, first you have to have indicators, no? to know what actually are the things that you're going to collect. So if we build upon the slide that I just presented at the beginning of the examples, that we have the gender disaggregation data, then we have the awareness raising guidance, then you have women in leadership position, and then the reform of legislation, and then maybe a further step, it could be also the budgeting. So we could develop indicator for that and say, okay, to what extent has the project really done for example, the integration of sex disaggregated data. So it could be to detect that. Then we could say, okay, to what extent have been like materials been integrated into that are related to gender integrated to the project. So it could be kind of creating progress markers within these different dimensions, and that then could afterwards really be tracked within the project. So basically, it would have to start from the planning phase, having indicators that really capture that. Then throughout the project implementation, these indicators could be monitored, and at the end, in the evaluation, this could come from an external expert to have a view on that and say, okay, to really confirm to what extent these different dimensions have been really applied and have had specific tangible results. Basically, in our current projects, we don't have such kind of a project that integrates all these levels that I'm just kind of presenting to you. You've seen that some projects that are from different rounds and different levels of maturity have integrated some of these aspects, so they have indicators just for these types of activities. But I think moving forward, and I think this is also an encouragement to all participants of today's webinar, you don't have to be overwhelmed for such difficult integration at so many levels. You just have to start step by step from where you are and feel confident. For example, if it's about starting with the disaggregation of data, then start with it. If you're able to really develop as well a guideline or a training, go with it. It's really about doing this collective effort and reaching out to colleagues just like us to really provide support. So I think this could be really the message from my side to all the people today. It's really about making an effort, reaching out and thinking what is possible, because what we don't want is that the gender component is not like an extra administrative layer, but it's really something substantive that should really help the goals of each of the projects. Back to you, Marianne.
Well, I think as closing thoughts, those are very good and very appropriate thoughts for us all going forward. There's one more question. I know we're just running out of time, but there's a question in the chat about good examples here. And would this also be used to assess gender responsiveness in response to Target 7 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework? And I think we all are inspired by that framework and have it in mind. So luckily, we have the Jeff Gender Partnership, where we interact with colleagues in the Convention on Biological Diversity and others, and we do share thoughts like that. So we will keep thinking about those elements going forward. But with that, I'd like to close today's session. I want to thank all our speakers for your really rich information. I want to thank my colleagues here at the Secretariat for organizing this wonderful session at the start of Minamata Online 2024 season. And thank you to all the participants for tuning in.
Thank you.
Have a good day and evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.